So welcome back. Here's the studio tour, part 2, and today we're in the vinyl cutting room. So I'm going to show you around these machines behind me, which I use to cut records. If you saw my previous video, you'll have got a sneak peek of these, but on this one I'm going to go a bit more into depth about these machines, and I'll talk about how they work, how I use them, and I'll sort of talk you through the process of actually cutting a record from getting the blank to actually getting music on it and being able to play it. So let's go. I've got my lav mic on today because I think what I'm going to do is grab the camera, and it's going to be more of a handheld video just so I can get right up close to all the different parts on the machines and show you all the different bits and get in all the awkward places because we're a little bit crammed in here. So yeah, let's go. Let's get started. Okay, right, so let's start with this one, and this is a Presto 28N cutting lathe, and oh, the focus has just worked, so that's good. And it's the only one left in the world on planet Earth in working condition, or just that people know of. As far as we can tell, we've done loads of research, and this is the last one. What used to happen is people would take little bits of these out, and then they'd get lost and discarded. So this is the only one left in fully working condition. So let's grab the camera and let's get close up, and I'll show you all the different parts of it. Right, here we go. So this is the 28N. So I'll do a little explanation of what's what first, because it looks a bit like a steampunk kind of monster or something like that. So we've got two turntables, two platters, so each one can have a record on it, a blank record, and then behind it here is the overhead system, the feed screw, and this is the actual cutting head. So this is the bit that actually gets the sound and cuts it into a groove on the record. So there's two of these, one over there, one over there. So they both do the same thing, left and right, and then each one has a microscope so that we can zoom in and look at the grooves. It's got a light on down here. Click that. See, the light comes on. Now, with a phone camera, you can actually zoom in and see the grooves through here. Oh, we can actually with this camera, great. So there you go. So those are the grooves of that record. And you can see how they're actually a little bit wavy. And I'll talk more about that later, but when it comes to see those ones bumping into each other, so that's an indication that the low end is probably, it's just safe, but we wouldn't want to push it anymore, otherwise they would start overlapping, or the record would start skipping on playback. So that's why we have the microscopes, so that we can zoom in and look at the grooves really closely, and we can tell, we can get information about the volume, about the velocity of the bass and stuff like that. So that's, yeah, really handy to have. So back to the lathe anyway. So we've got left and right. So originally when these were made, these were set up as transcription devices. So this is kind of pre the music industry, really, pre-music being a saleable thing. So what would happen is you'd have a record on here, this would be spinning, cutting over here, and then as that record was running out, we could flip these switches here, like that, and then it would continue onto this one. So you'd have this one set up and ready to go. And then you could flip back as well, so you could just continuously record very long speeches. This lathe was actually at the Nuremberg trials, believe it or not, and 5 or 6 of them were flew over from the States to Germany to record those, and this is the last remaining one. And then in the centre there's just a few things, like there's just a little meter there to show you the volume of what's been cut. But now I've kind of bypassed a lot of that stuff, and I've got this set up so that I can cut 2 records at the same time. So I have 2 singles on there, for instance, and both the cutting heads will be receiving the same signal, and then I can cut 2 records at once, which you kind of need to do because we're cutting in real time and it's a very time consuming process. And you're probably wondering what this box is in the middle as well. So this is a vacuum box. So when we're cutting a record, the swarf that actually gets cut away gets sucked up through these tubes here, and it gets sucked into this box, and that stops it from getting tangled around the cutting stylus. So if I put this camera down a sec, then I can show you what actually gets sucked out of a record. So this is the swarf. So if you can see, each one of those is actually the width of a record groove. Each hair is literally a groove of a record that's been cut away. So this is like, yeah, it's very soft and fluffy. And this is what gets cut away and sucked into the vacuum box there. And then we just throw it away, or we make it into wigs or Santa beards and sell it online. We don't really do that. And while I've got this on here, I'll show you a few other things down here. So this is just the switch for the vacuum. That turns the vacuum on or off. Behind here we have, this is a stylus heating unit. So you might be able to see the wires here that are running, or behind here, and they run into the cutting head. And these carry the audio signal, but there's also another set of wires that can carry heat, so that they can heat up the cutting stylus to make it easier to cut through the discs. So that's what they're for. And then this one back here, that is just the box that carries the signal from the amplifier below the lathe into the cutting head. So that's kind of how the audio gets out and actually into there and allows us to cut music onto a record. And then you'll also notice that there's loads of tools lying around. Cutting records is a very sort of mechanical process, so there's always stuff, there's always Allen keys, that's the stylus adjuster. This is a weight, so we can weigh the weight of the cutting head on the record, because the weight of that is important to getting the right groove width and stuff like that. So yeah, there's tools just lying about everywhere in this studio. There's calipers here and stuff, drills and all sorts, and all these drawers here, down here, which are a bit blurry, but they're just full of tools, screwdrivers, multimeters, measuring devices, all sorts of stuff. You wouldn't believe the amount of tools I've had to buy since I started cutting records. So there you go. So that's the top, and then underneath the lathe, it's going to be pretty dark, but that is the vacuum box for the lathe. So that's what that's the actual motor of the vacuum that sucks the swarf away. There's just some electronics over this side. That's power conversion stuff. And then if we get under here, you can see these are the 2 power amps. So these are carrying the signal from the computer into these power amps, and then from the power amps the signal goes up behind here into this box here, and then via these connectors it comes out of there, up, and then into the cutting head. here. And then if I can do this one-handed, lift this up, you'll be able to see that's the cutting head, and that bit there is the tiny diamond tipped stylus that actually does the cutting. So there you go. And then this cutting head, when this is all switched on, just moves across the record really slow, like that, to create the continuous groove inwards. So there we go. That's the basic overview of the record cutting lathe. So now let's have a look at the other lathe behind me, which in theory does the same thing, but it's got maybe a few things that are slightly different, so I'll show you those. So this is the Presto 8DG, so it's the same company that made those, but this is a bit more of a modern update from that one. So it's a little bit newer, but it's still 1950s lathe, and again it's been updated with modern stereo cutting head, but everything else is the same. So it's a bit more heavy duty, a bit more sturdy, and I typically use this for cutting albums on. And it's got the same microscope, an ashtray there, which was from those days when they didn't really know about the dangers of smoking, so useful tools and stuff, little bits in there. Big, thick, heavy platter, and then a very similar overhead, nearly the same in fact, apart from this one doesn't sit on the record like those ones do. This one is actually powered by the motors underneath, which turn a mechanism in here, which in turn rotates the feed screw, and that helps the cutting head move along. And again, this has got a vacuum system behind it, slightly different, but it's doing the same job. And this is a bit of an older stylus heating unit for this one. And then down here underneath we've got the amplifiers, and there's some power conversion stuff there because this is from the 50s and it's American, so we just need to convert the voltage and frequency down there. And then if we can get right under, we can just see it's a bit dark, but the motors and stuff are all under there. That's what drives the turntable. And then if I unlock this bit, get that out the way. So this has a mechanism here, and this alters what we call the pitch of the record. And that's not to do with pitch, how you might think high pitch and low pitch, as in a higher frequency or lower frequency. This is actually altering the gap between the grooves. So on this setting it's on, this actually spaces the grooves out wider, and then as we move up these steps, then the grooves get closer together. And that's really important because it allows us to control the length of time, how much audio we can actually fit on a record, and it also allows us to experiment with different volumes and different amounts of low end. So remember when we looked through the microscope earlier and you could see the grooves of the record waving like that. So the more low end and the more bass you have on a record, the wider those modulations get. So you've got to be really careful. If you go too far, they'll bang into each other or cross over, and that means on playback the record will skip. So if you can space those grooves out a little bit more, you can have more room for more low end and more overall volume on a record. But of course that means if the grooves are spaced out wider apart, then you actually have less time overall. So it's always a bit of a trade-off with cutting records. If you want really loud, really bassy stuff, then we can space the grooves out to allow that, but you're going to get less cutting time. And on the other hand, if you've got like an album and and it's over 20 minutes and you really sort of push for time, we can accommodate that by putting the grooves a little bit closer, but then you're going to have to reduce the low end slightly and maybe even reduce the overall volume. But thankfully, that mechanism I just showed you can allow us some leeway on both of those and allow us to experiment a little bit. In some more modern cutting lathes, the Neumanns, then they actually have an onboard computer that does that automatically. But those are pretty much out of reach for most people and studios. They sort of cost more than the average house. So these older cutting lathes that you can then modernise and update are really the only option for us independent record cutters. So let's talk now a little bit about the blank records and actually getting the music on to a record, cutting, and how we actually prepare a record. So here I've got a load of blanks, and these come like this with a protective plastic coating on them, so you can just peel that off, pop your blank on your record lathe, there's already one on there, and then apply some anti-static liquid, because static is the enemy when cutting records, and we're always trying to eliminate that. And then we can set up the machine and set up the cutting head, get it in the right place, and then actually lower it and start actually cutting the record. So as you can see, we can cut all sizes. We've got lots of different colours here as well, which are always good fun to cut. So the basic preparation is getting your blank record, peeling off the protective plastic from it, putting it on the lathe, and then spraying it with anti-static spray, giving that a wipe off with a microfiber cloth, and then you're kind of good to go. So this is a 12-inch blank. It's still got the protective film on it because I'm not cutting it just yet. So we put this on, take the film off, grab our spray, spray it on, and then I've got various clamps down here that we'd put on the middle, and that just secures the record down so it's nice and flat. I've got another one here which you can tighten with one of these Allen keys down here somewhere. So put that on, spray it, clean it, and then it's ready to cut. You'd position your cutting head over the edge, and you'd get everything working, everything switched on, and you're ready to go. And over here on the computer, you can see I've got the audio lined up. So this is one side of an album with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 songs. This is the second side of an album, side B, with another 5 songs. So they're all sequenced and ready to go. So when I'm ready to cut, I just need to hit play, and then the audio will come out of the computer via the interface there, and then it'll come out of the interface, and that runs all the way around the back of the studio. That goes into the power amp down there, and then from that power amp it goes up into this box which we saw on the other lathe, into these wires here, and then those carry the signal all the way up and then into the cutting head here, and that's where these 2 transducers here either side actually vibrate very much like a speaker would vibrate, and they're attached to the diamond stylus there, and that's what actually vibrates and cuts the groove and cuts the music into the record. So a lot of people would see this and assume that that's left and that's right, but these actually operate in more of a mid-side mode. So one of those is cutting the middle channel, and the other one is actually cutting the side information, the out of phase stuff. So they're cutting at 45-degree angle each, and that's how you get your stereo information into a record. That's quite a big subject, so I'd probably do a separate video to elaborate more on that, but that's kind of get the basic gist of it. And then of course we've got a turntable over here just to check everything. This is quite an old turntable. It's got a nice nice playback cartridge on, but it's nothing too high end. It's quite a bog standard amp as well. I like to test everything on a kind of consumer setup, so I know that if it sounds good on this, it's going to sound good on everything else. Personally, I don't really think there's much point testing a record on a super high-end turntable and valve amp and kind of crazy speakers, because not anyone else is going to listen to it on those. I want to listen to it or test it on just an average system, a good system, but you know, nothing that's out of reach of just the normal record listener. So I think that's about covered it. I think I've covered most of the basics at least, but if you've spotted anything in the video that I didn't explain, or you want a bit more of an in-depth explanation on, then just drop a comment below. I've got loads more videos to make on all this kind of stuff, and honestly I could just sit talking about this all day, and you'd never shut me up. So I'm always happy to do more stuff for you. Unfortunately, I can't actually show you a video of me cutting today because the album I'm cutting is unreleased, and then if any of the sound was in the video, I'd get copyright infringement and the video would get taken down. Because one thing I didn't actually explain is that when we're cutting, you will actually hear the sound coming out of this cutter head in the room. So the sound, oh, my camera's gone wonky. So the sound that's coming out of the computer and actually being cut will actually be audible in the room via the cutting head. So yeah, so I can't show you that today, but I have spoken to some more bands who will allow me to cut some of their stuff and not get a copyright infringement from. So I'll be able to show you that. So that's coming in future videos. And if you haven't seen them already, go check out the Record Cutting Club videos on my channel, where we interview independent artists, get them in the studio, have a bit of a chat, and we cut a record together as well. So if you're interested, go check those out. So that's it for today and for now. I hope that's been interesting. As always, give me a shout with any questions, any comments. I'm always happy to hear from you, and I'm here to help you with your mastering and record cutting journeys. So for now, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.